Hey everybody, it's me, Kent Heckenlively, with Twice as Lively. This is episode 10, entitled My Dinner with Lue Elizondo. Okay, my first point is that with a little bit of planning, you can lead a very interesting life. So let me give you an example about that. So a couple months ago, I saw online that the UFO whistleblower Lue Elizondo was coming to San Francisco as part of his Persona Non Grata tour. And so it's at the Marines Memorial, which is a place I've been to several times before. So I thought, oh, that'd be great to hear him talk. You know, I always like to actually meet people or see them in person, kind of get a sense of who they are. But what it also had was was a special VIP dinner that if you paid extra, you could go to. Now, I've done a number of these things before, and so I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. And you know, the usual setup is that tickets are like $50, and then the special dinner is like $250. So I thought, okay, so I'll spend $250 to get the opportunity to meet Lue Elizondo under good circumstances. And that's something that I think is a really good general rule for life, which is if you're looking to meet somebody important, that it's really a good idea to meet them under ideal circumstances. So I thought, relatively small dinner, I would think it's usually, these kind of things are usually anywhere from 10 to 20 people. I thought, wow, Lue is really a leader in the UFO field. So what a great opportunity. So if you don't know who Lue Elizondo is, let me read a little bit from his biography. So this is from Lue's own website. So it gives you an idea of who he is and probably also why he's somewhat controversial in the movement. So his website says, Lue is the son of a Cuban immigrant father who is a dissident of the Fidel Castro regime. His father spent time as a political prisoner in Cuba for his involvement in the U.S.-led invasion of the Bay of Pigs. After his release from Castro's prison, his father was exiled from Cuba for the remainder of his life. Lue grew up in South Florida and as a young man was often exposed to his father's efforts in trying to help change the political situation in Cuba. It was in this environment that Lue learned the importance to fight for something greater than himself and that all things worth fighting for come at a cost. These values were installed in Lue by his father from a young age, and they are values he has carried throughout his life to this day. Lue attended the University of Miami with double majors in microbiology and immunology and minors in chemistry and mathematics. He also gained advanced research experience in parasitology and specific tropical diseases such as malaria, leishmaniasis, and trypanosomosis. During his research experience, he was tangentially exposed to U.S. government intelligence agencies that were also interested in biological research. At that point, Lue decided his future would be with America's intelligence organizations. Lue deeply believed that he needed to serve his country. After completing college, Lue enlisted in the United States Army. During his Army enlistment, Lue completed tours in the Republic of South Korea and in the continental U.S. In 1998, Lue was recruited into a sensitive U.S. intelligence program as a civilian intelligence officer and special agent. His assignments included being stationed throughout Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Middle East. Immediately after 9/11, Lue served in Afghanistan and assumed the role of operations officer, the first counterintelligence coordinating authority, and battle captain. He was honored to serve additional tours throughout the Middle East over the next several years, while his wife raised their family in the U.S. In late 2003, Lue returned to Washington, D.C., where he oversaw counterespionage and counterterrorism investigations worldwide. Later in his career, while still in Washington, he served at the Office of the National Counterintelligence Executive and later the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Lue was also the former senior leader of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP, the secretive Pentagon unit that studied UFOs. In December of 2017, the New York Times showcased a front page article bringing this program to light and public awareness. Lue resigned from the Pentagon in October 2017 to raise awareness of unidentified aerial phenomenon and their potential threat to America's national security. Since 2007, Lue has remained aggressively engaged in public awareness of the UAP topic by participating in innumerable television news programs, podcasts, and television series to include History Channel's Unidentified, Inside America's UFO program, among others. He is actively engaged behind the scenes, working with members of the various branches of government to promote and fight for transparency into the UAP topic and what it means for society. So that is Lue's official biography, which kind of explains why some people in the UFO field are supportive of Lue, because they say he's somebody who has definitely been there. And some are a little bit more concerned because they say, well, he's been part of counterintelligence. And as we all know, our intelligence agencies have been working in counterintelligence, not just against foreign adversaries, but often against the American public themselves. So there is suspicion about Lue and what he is genuinely doing. And there you have it. That is, I think, a good, accurate description of Lue's background. Now, you can see behind me my Last Samurai poster. One of the things I really enjoy about that movie is that it talks about a journey that hopefully all of us take at some point in our lives, in which we interact with people who we may have initially been suspicious about. In that movie, Tom Cruise as Nathan Algren is hired by the Japanese government to put down a samurai rebellion led by a gentleman named Katsumoto, played wonderfully by Ken Watanabe. And it's a great film because what happens is Cruise comes to understand what the samurai are fighting for. And so, as much as Lue is a figure of great reverence in the UFO community and significant suspicion, I just kind of figured, in the spirit of The Last Samurai, I would go and have dinner with him. Also, what I love from the old movies is, where the heroes and villains sit down together and have a meal and actually have a discussion where they figure out, hey, should we be enemies or not? So that's my idea. It's how, with a little bit of planning, I can often get myself to meet very interesting people, people in the public eye. And so as I was planning to go to this dinner, which, a day or two before, I got, the location of the dinner and what time you're supposed to be there. So I was supposed to be there at 6:00. It was at Chesty's Restaurant, Bar and Grill, which is on the 12th floor of the Marines Memorial Building. So, I always have this little bit of trouble, which is like, okay, they tell me to be there at 6:00. Should I show up at 5:30? Because, there's always that inevitable time that people get there and everything. But, sometimes when you do that, you look like too much of an eager beaver. And I thought, no, I'm just going to show up right at 6:00, right at the time they told me. This is my first meeting with this guy. Let me not do anything unusual. Okay. So I get there, 6 o'clock. They tell me the secret word to say to the maitre d' to bring me to their party. And so I get there, and there's a long table with about 12 people. Lou is sitting at the front of it, and the only seat left is at the far end of the table with a beautiful view of San Francisco. So it was lovely. And I'm just going like, crap. Usually my strategy is to show up a little bit early, and there's often a bubble around the celebrity so that nobody's invading it, and I usually invade it and sit right next to them, and that gives me the opportunity to talk to them for a whole bunch. But I showed up on time. There was one seat left at the table. So I'm like, crap. Okay, so I'll sit here. And I'm thinking, well, here I am. Let me talk to the people next to me. So I start talking to the guy right next to me, who's a fascinating guy. He was a reporter for The Hill, which is the congressional newspaper. And he'd also worked for the Secretary of Defense, and he was currently employed by Stanford University in a capacity with security. So wonderful guy, really interesting. And, we talked about the UFO issue and how, even when you're skeptical, you have to say, okay, something really interesting is happening here. The constitutional lawyer, Danny Sheehan, who's been in 4 of my books, was across from me and one seat over. So, hey, Danny, how you doing? What's going on? You're going to be in DC next Tuesday for the David Grush doc. No, I got some stuff going on, but on the 25th, I'll be in DC for a big disclosure meeting. Oh, dang, I'm going to miss you because I'm going to be there that week. So, we have that kind of a conversation. And then, right across from me was a real interesting gentleman. And so he was telling a story about his grandfather, who was a spy in World War II. He was a piano player, and he would be dropped behind enemy lines. And I guess he'd done a whole lot of studying about German drinking songs. So he was an expert in that. And so he'd go into the German beer halls, and he'd be a piano player. And, while he was there, he just overhear what all the soldiers were talking about and the officials, and, kind of an exciting story. So I'm like, wow, this is really cool. Okay. So I'm not with Lue Elizondo, but I'm really sitting near some interesting people, and, I like interesting people. So there I am, and I'm thinking like, okay, it's 6 o'clock. Here I am, and okay, I'm going to have an enjoyable evening, maybe make some new friends, and so the bread comes, the salad comes, the prime rib comes. I'm like, okay, that's good, and I've been doing a really good job of being social, being entertaining. They ask me what I do, and I say, I write books, and I've been doing this. And the guy who's a reporter for The Hill said, like, didn't I see you on News Nation like a week or so ago? I'm like, yeah. I was the guy talking about the supposed executive order that's coming out from the Trump administration to protect whistleblowers. So it's nice. Okay, we're all kind of on the same level. But I'm thinking like, Lou. I got to get to Lou. How do I get to Lou? How do I, get this whole thing set up and, make contact with them? First contact, So at 7 o'clock, so an hour after I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, all right, the event starts at 8 o'clock. It's 7 o'clock. Probably at 7:30, he's going to have to leave, or shortly after that. So I have a half hour window of opportunity here to go talk to Lou. So considering that I've probably done like a good social job for that hour, talking to the people who are around me. I get up from my seat and I walk over to where Lou is, and he's sitting at the end of the table. And he's kind of holding court. You know, I've been to enough of these events, and sometimes, I'm the guest of honor. So I know the setup, which is you're supposed to be charming and entertaining, and people are going to ask questions and they're going to feel, oh, I'm nervous talking to this person who's written a book. I'm sure he's so smart. I'm so stupid. You kind of get that. And so it's like, okay, you're doing the show. And so I'm thinking like, okay, so he's sitting alone at the end of the table. If I stand over him, that's a little bit weird. So maybe I'll sort of squat down. But I'd made a strategic mistake the night before, which is I had decided to double my martial arts workout. So I did 2 hours of martial arts work, and I hadn't realized what that would do to my legs. So as I try to squat down, I suddenly get cramps in my leg. And I'm thinking like, okay, I'm meeting this guy I want to make a good impression on, and my legs are cramping up. But I don't want to scream. And so, so I kind of get up, and I'm a little bit, uncomfortable. I'm like, oh, but I don't want to scream out or anything. And so Lou, to his credit, kind of looks at me and says, hey, why don't I just get you a chair? I was like, oh, that'd be great. And so then he rushes, gets me a chair so I can sit down right next to him. And I'm thinking like, oh, okay, this is nice. Now I'm just going to sit down. I'll listen, I'll be, a good listener. And then when there's a break in the conversation, I will jump in there and ask some questions. Maybe I can talk directly to him because he's written his book, Imminent. I've got my book, Catastrophic Disclosure, and in my book, I make the point that Lou comes from the world of intelligence, which says that patriotism may mean that sometimes you don't tell the truth. And I come from the legal world where, you raise your right hand, you say, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. So we may have different ideas of patriotism. And I just wanted to, point out to him that while I felt it was incumbent upon me to be honest about the potential differences between us, we both may be patriotic in our own ways. So that's my intention. I'm thinking like, okay, let me make this good impression on him. But I go to sit down in the chair that Lou has thoughtfully provided to me. And I suddenly get an enormous Charlie horse. And I simply have to jump up from my seat. Oh, I'm looking oh, Kent, you are doing a great job making a good impression here. So I'm just like, okay. Stretch my leg out. Stretch that leg out. Okay. All right. It's calming down. Okay. Can I move forward a little bit? Can I move forward a little bit? Okay. All right. Okay. I'll sit just like this. Will it go away? Ah, good. It finally went away. And so that takes about 5 minutes. And so I'm finally seated next to Lou, and people are talking to him. And this is where sort of like the writer in me comes out. The writer in me is like, who am I looking at? So I've had this opinion about Lou in the various interviews that I've seen him in, which is he often appears kind of somber, okay, and a little bit. It seemed like he was 15, 20 pounds overweight, just didn't seem like comfortable in his body sometimes. And you can understand it. I mean, he went into a life in intelligence, which was to be secret, and here he is out there. But he always seemed like a guy who was not quite comfortable with what he was doing. And so I wanted to see him in his environment. And recently, what he has said is he's come to the realization that he may have some mild form of autism. So I'm thinking like, okay, I want to take a look at him and figure it out. And I have to say, something has been going on with Lou in the past couple months. Uh, Not only did he look like he had trimmed down 15 or 20 pounds, um, but there was a lightness to him. He seemed happy. He seemed to be really engaged. Now you can be that, knowing that you're at a dinner with people who expect you to be that, but but it seemed like there was a lightness to him. And one of the things I just have to comment about is, and when you go into the public sphere, this is something that happens. You realize you need to have the uniform. Okay. And so the uniform that, you know, I have is like how I'm dressed. Okay. Lou's uniform is a little bit different. He's got the hat on, he's got the, beard, not a thick beard. Uh, he's got a nice shirt, but he's in shorts, and he's got the tattoos because he's a military tough guy. And so I'm like, okay, I get it. It's the uniform. It's how people expect to see you. And so that was really good. Or, just sort of like intriguing. It's like, okay, got the uniform, got the shtick. All right, let's see what it's like. And so the people around were like, firing questions at him. And, it was really interesting. And so, I'm just taking the time to listen to the questions that they're saying and what Lou's saying. And, they're the kind of questions that everybody has. But here it is a private setting. And so it's sort of like, okay, what's Lou gonna say? What I found with a lot of public people is that what they'll say privately is often not much different than what they'll say publicly. And I found that to be consistent with Lou. So, for example, and this is when you get in the public eye, you realize, okay, there are just going to be some ways I have to talk. Okay, it's like pressing the record button. I've been asked this question so many times, I just got to do it this way. So Lou is, uses the line, "The Rubicon has been crossed. Disclosure is going to happen. It's going to take a couple years for it to happen because the public has to be ready for it. The intelligence agencies have to be ready for it. There's a lot of crap that happened in these secret programs, and the public has to be, desensitized to it. We need amnesty." I'm like, okay, all the kind of stuff that I've seen, or I've heard. And then people are just saying like, so Lou, do we really have crash ships? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh Lou, is it really true that certain areas of physics have been determined to be off limits, like Brett, like Brett Weinstein? No, it's his brother. Eric Weinstein. Is it true, like Eric Weinstein says, that some areas of physics, scientists have been, shooed away from? Oh, yeah, yeah. There's lots of areas of physics that should have been investigated. So I'm like, okay, got it. All right. Yeah, it's like all the things that I've heard in other interviews. So it's nothing really secret. But then there was a point where I came to realize that Lue Elizondo is a really bright guy. And it was on the question of the Amumura object, which was uh, a, an object from outside of our solar system that Dr. Avi Loeb out of Harvard had questioned whether it might be an interstellar craft or maybe the remains of some interstellar craft. And the question that was asked was why we can't just get a good picture of it. And Elizondo talked for a good 5 minutes about why we couldn't get a good picture of it. And, this is where, like the teacher in me, the lawyer in me, just kind of sits back and goes, okay, let me see how intelligently you can explain this. And so what I got to understand from Lue is not there's the problem that the Amumura is traveling at an extremely high rate of speed, apparently faster than most interstellar objects that we see. So it's kind of like, what is the shutter speed of the camera? Because it's at such a great distance. Okay, so there's that problem. But there's also the problem that as the object is coming closer to the sun, well, what is happening is the surface of it is heating up. And this creates an outflow of material, kind of a corona. So it's not just that it's moving really fast, but it's giving off material. And Lue did a great job of explaining that. And I was like, wow, you really understand that. You understand the difficulties that even with very sophisticated sensors, we may not be able to see it very well. So I was impressed by that. So good job, Lue. There was a funny moment, and this is why I just like to sit back and watch people. And so somebody had made a comment about the claim that there had been an effort during the presidency of George Walker Bush from 2001 to 2008 for disclosure. So this was in the years after 9/11. And it was interesting because the person was describing it, how this alleged group of experts were looking at all the pros and cons of disclosure. And what they came to the conclusion of is that the cons more than outweighed the pros. And the look of terror on Lue's face was very interesting. And he immediately asked, where did you get that information? Who said that? And the answer was Dr. Hal Puthoff, who is well known to people in the UFO community. And you could visibly see Lue start to react, but he needed to hear a couple times that this information was already public. And so, I'm listening to that, I'm hearing that, I'm going like, okay, this is something that scares Lue. He doesn't want to be out over his skis, for lack of a better way of saying it. And so when he understood that, he seemed to relax. Another comment that he made, which I've heard him say in other interviews, is he doesn't want to end up in an orange jumpsuit. And as somebody who has written about whistleblowers, this is something I hear time and again. And well, not necessarily with my whistleblowers, but in putting together catastrophic disclosure and going after the UFO issue, time and time again, I have heard this fear from people who are witnesses and people who are researching it. And for the life of me, I have asked time and again uh, of congressmen, of journalists, of UFO experts, how real is this fear that the people who've worked in these legacy programs might find themselves in legal jeopardy? And the overwhelming answer I get from them is, yeah, Kent, it's very real. So, you know, I heard Lue say this, that uh, he feared ending up in an orange jumpsuit was intriguing. And I thought, okay, that's consistent with what I've heard. Um, as the dinner was winding up, uh, there was discussion about the need for amnesty for the people who've worked in these programs because they may have engaged in what we might consider to be heinous crimes, but they thought at the time were necessary. So after listening to Lue for about 20, 25 minutes, I decided to, hi, Lue, I'm Ken Heckenlively. I've been working in this UFO field for about 2 years, wrote this book. And, from my sources, many of my sources, people I've gotten to know, UFO community, are friends with Lue. And so I had contacted a couple of them to say, could you just put in a good word for me with Lue, so he knows who the hell I am, who the heck and lively I am. And Lou was very kind, and he said, "Oh, you know, Eric Burleson says just great things about you." And I'm like, "Oh, well, I love Burleson too." So yeah, we think the world. Oh, did I mention that Burleson said you're a Boy Scout and a patriot, and he really loves what you're doing. So you do that sort of deal. So I had a book of Lou's. And so I asked him to sign it to me. He wrote a nice little, sentiment to me. And then, I pulled out my book and I said, I, I took the liberty of writing a little note to you. He's like, oh, great. So we exchanged books, but then he had to get going. So I'm like, okay, now we got to go to the talk. And, it was a great talk. He had the constitutional lawyer, Danny Sheehan, and he did a conversation. And, it was more him asking Danny Sheehan questions because Danny Sheehan has been a big transparency advocate. And, what I have noticed, one of my previous books was Twilight of the Shadow Government. I wrote it with a former CIA officer. And, you know, there were certain things. Oh, let's see, right there, Twilight of the Shadow Government. One of the things that co-author had done was, I would ask him certain questions, and he'd go, Kent, I can't answer that question. And so I said, oh, okay. So can you point me to any sources that might be good for me to research? And you go, oh yeah, here I can. Go read da 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 da. Oh, okay. So I'll go read da 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 da. And then I write about da 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 da. And then I showed it to him. And I'm like, Kevin, are you okay with this? Yeah. Oh, so and so said that. Yeah, so and so said that. Oh, okay, great. So it's out there in the public sphere. Yeah, it's out there in the public sphere. So same kind of thing. So for me, uh, watching Lue ask Danny Sheehan, who is his long-term attorney, these questions means like, oh, okay. So Lue knows what Danny is likely to say, and Danny knows what Lue wants him to say. So they're doing it in this way that is totally legal. So there were a couple interesting things in the talk that I just felt like I had to mention. Um, and I'm curious as to whether what is going to happen in the UFO disclosure movement is a redefinition of things. And as a writer, I know that it's important to get people to think in certain terms, like, is my character going to live or die? Are they scared whether somebody's going to kill them, or are they scared whether this relationship is going to work out? So, grabbing the audience's attention and focusing them on certain things is really important. So he did this thing that was kind of interesting. Was he said, "Okay, I want you to think of a ship. Just take a minute, think of a ship." And so, everybody's quiet for a moment. And then he flashes a picture on the screen, and, it's a cruise ship and a sailing ship. And he's like, "Okay, how many of you thought of a cruise ship or a sailing ship?" And then, some people say, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." Okay. Then what about an airship, a starship? Yeah, yeah, I love an airship. So you see a big dirigible, or you see the U.S. Enterprise, from Star Trek. And then he flashes up friendship, censorship. These are all ships. So, I was kind of like listening to that going like, huh, what's up with that? That's interesting. So, you know, as a writer, I know it's important to get the audience to focus on things, but I was a little bit confused about that. He did something else which was interesting, which was, looking at the word para, and he'd say, "Okay, so what do you think of when you hear the word paramedic?" It's like everybody's like, "Oh, yeah, 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 good, 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 good." And he goes, "Oh, what about if something is paramount?" "Oh, yeah, 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 that's good. What about if something is paranormal?" And it was an interesting sort of deal in terms of, yeah, why are paramedics good? Why are why is it if something is paramount, we go, "Oh, that's really important." But if we say something is paranormal, um, why are we suspicious of it? So, as a teacher, it's interesting to see what other teachers focus on in their lessons. And it really is public education that Lue is doing. And, I was just a little bit intrigued by that. And you know, I'm a little bit in the dark what it's about. He also talked about being in our boxes, and the discussion that people are having about whether these beings are angels or demons. And if we're in just the religious box, well, that's what we're going to see. And I felt like I understood that point really well, that maybe what's really going to happen is our for lack of a better word, what do they call it? The Overton window of what's true or reasonable to believe might get dramatically expanded. Maybe there can be angelish or devilish aspects to the UFO phenomenon, kind of like whenever we deal with people, sometimes we talk about them bringing out the better or worse angels of our nature. But maybe it's something much larger than that. Maybe these aliens are going to force us to confront a lot of things. One of the things I just have to say is I don't know, first of all, if there are any aliens out there, but let's just talk about the alleged number of alien species. Recently in the news, it's like, oh, it seems like there's 4 different kinds of aliens. There's the Greys, there's the Nordics, there's the reptilians, and the insectoids. Okay, all right, 4 different kinds. Well, in putting together catastrophic disclosure, you talk to different people and they'll say, oh, well, actually, there's 70 to 100 different types of aliens that are visiting our world. Some of them are amphibian like and blah, 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 blah. Like I said, I don't know. But this is what the other people are saying. And one of the things that really bugs me is this idea that the reason the aliens don't talk to us is because we haven't reached a certain stage of moral or spiritual evolution. And I say, that kind of sounds like the older guy dating a young chick who wants to marry him, who says, you're nice and everything, but you got to make sure you keep that weight off. And maybe if you keep that weight off for the next couple of years, then I'll consider marrying you. So I'm not saying human beings are great, but are we at the bottom of like 100 different alien species? Are we like the 101st dumbest, least developed? I'm kind of sorry. I don't believe that. I kind of feel like, okay, at least we got to be in the middle. Okay. Maybe we're in the top quarter. So I'm real suspicious when people say the reason the aliens haven't contacted us is because we're not worthy. So color me suspicious on that. But all in all, my dinner with Lue was very enlightening. I made a connection, and hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit more. But I encourage everybody to stay tuned to this UFO story because I think some really interesting stuff is going to be coming out, and I'm not sure where it's going. I don't think that this is going to be solved in a couple weeks or a couple months. I don't think that Steven Spielberg's Disclosure Day is going to be the end of the story. So whether Lue is telling it true or is a disinformation agent, they're saying that it's going to be a couple years at best. So what I say to all of you is just keep listening and keep paying attention. I think that there is something to the story. It's going to be a continuing story. Unlike many people, I do not think it is a distraction from, current events. I think that there is something real there. As I always say, I kind of say I'm 85% convinced there are aliens, but I have a 15% healthy skepticism that this might be all part of some deep state intelligence distraction for us. But even if that's the story, that's a pretty damn big story too. So there you have it. My thoughts on my dinner with Lue, and hope that you enjoy my podcast. And I hope that I'm starting to figure this out. So hopefully I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks a lot.